It's February 22nd, as I kind of count it, but really it's 5 a.m. on February 23rd. And part of dealing with such painful topics and kind of reestablishing some biological connection to the event through emailing the people that have betrayed or abused me in various ways is a sickening amount of pain. So that's registered in 7 out of 10 headache. There's a certain sense of limbo and fatigue. I find myself binge watching different Netflix and YouTube things. It's, I guess, a regulation technique to seek to calm nerves. It's very painful. It's painful to make the recordings. It's painful to write the emails. I think overall, I think the healthiest thing that's happening is when you are abused in a powerless position, and what we have is one person in a high state of pain, still suffering symptoms from trauma, and at pain tolerance, writing to Fred Burks, writing to Peter Sandhill, writing to all the high facilitators, which include 4 former therapists, writing to Ann Watts, someone who, before the betrayal of being pushed towards secrecy and the failure to advocate to the community as her primary priority, with the ethical foundation of a therapeutic relationship trumping all other relationships in matters of professional negligence of this kind. This is both the circle of my abusers and, the historical circle of love and belonging as defined at that time. And so the concerns are that in having this terrain dishonored, again, that simply the law of mass, of many people's silence, of many people's prioritization of their own agendas over a client's well-being, that the message is bestowed again, you are not valuable. Perhaps more accurately, you are not as valuable as our survival agendas, which it's a little bit of a mixed bag, because, of course, if professionals didn't insist on abusing their patients and insist on covering it up and insist on denying responsibility and refusing to attune, there would be no need to survive. There would be a thriving community because best practices lead to a thriving community. Abuse practices lead to poverty and mediocrity and abuse, and then have to be contended, which brings up more fear of poverty and survival. As an empath, I really don't like being in the position to, appear to be taking away someone else's sense of security. I mean, mentally I understand that if they don't insist on behaving criminally, then they don't put themselves at risk of criminal proceedings. And mentally I understand that the primary responsibility of every public citizen encountering profound sociopathic professional abuse by a healer or set of therapists or teachers is to put public safety first. Nonetheless, it divides the psyche. Every abuse survivor in a powerless situation tends to blame themselves somewhat, which is reenacting or internalizing the abuser. That doesn't tend to shift until the balance of power shifts. But this is not a balanced power dynamic. Just the phenomena of scale makes me vulnerable to emotional, social, financial, and mental influence in a way that is abusive to my well-being. I think the healthiest thing is the pivot from, I guess there's an 80% pivot from seeking to accommodate my abusers by empathizing with their perspective. And there is an empathetic, there's a perspective that can be empathized with. Almost all of us are raised to be psychologically, traumatically, and chauvinistically illiterate. So, to some extent, we are all a victim of cult culture. Nonetheless, the studies are out, the books are out. I've asked all of the facilitators to read these books years ago, and the egregiousness of, just not even apologizing, etc., it doesn't leave that much room to believe that it's in public interest to stand by. Nonetheless, every single American that I've encountered around this has expressed a certain amount of sympathy for my abusers and has failed to advocate. And so there's an isolation. And I just imagine, I look at the statistics that 1 in 10 rape survivors come forward to the public. And I think, why is that? Well, most of them don't have a recording of the rape. They don't have the time and money to get support. They upset everyone, particularly when the sexual predator is in a higher power structure. It upsets everyone. It's a political nightmare for everyone to try and figure out how to respond. And so the easiest thing is to scapegoat the victim or pay them off. And the Harvey Weinstein trial is going on as we speak. The typical strategy, if it's a high-profile figure, is to sign a non-disclosure and be bought out, which just makes the next set of victims vulnerable by cleaning the record of the sexual abuser, so that the next victim feels deeply isolated, just as the people who sign the non-disclosure feel deeply isolated, and statistically often think of suicide. So that's the kind of integration of this time. It's a new thing to be fighting on so many fronts. It's a new thing to be fighting at all, let alone fighting with 4 therapists, my community, other members of the community, and I'm going to be giving a talk on homelessness in Marin at a church that I've had to again fight to advocate for our homeless. And meanwhile, dealing with 2 other people who were severely spiritually and psychologically abused by Concept Synergy, the company around the channeled entity Lazarus that was my main mentor starting at the age of 12. And it's just horrific to hear about the amount of shaming and abuse that goes on in spiritual community. There's no one in this to really let me fall apart and hold space for me. And that's just very sad. It's very sad.